this video, we will review all the pieces and parts which are required for eprescribing in CareTracker. We'll review how to enter a medication, download medication history, electronically prescribe a medication, view formulary information, and effectively handle renewal requests. We're going to begin in the administration module. To access the administration module, you can click on administration on the left-hand side. And underneath the clinical tab in the middle here, we will want to go to maintenance, and then provider screening is the first thing that we want to set up and make sure that is set up prior to prescribing with inside a CareTracker. There are different types of interactions that CareTracker will show, such as drug to allergy, precaution screening, abusive duplicate therapy, and non-abusive therapy. The suppressed drug to allergy, which is this third one right here, must be selected to no, which is a requirement for MIPS if you are doing the MIPS incentive program. This allows the system to review an allergy from an allergy standpoint. The remainder of the choices, the suppressed precaution screening, the abuse duplicate therapy, and the non-abuse duplicate therapy are the choices of the practice. So these can be turned on to yes, or they could be turned and left as no. You'll see here your adverse drug effects, drug to food allergy, or drug to drug. You have severity settings. You have 0, which is 0 minor, 1 is a moderate effect, or 2 is a major. Again, this would be a choice of the practice, which severity that they want to be alerted to. And you would just select the provider from the drop down here for the provider that you're setting these screenings for. And once you've done that, you would just select set defaults, and that would select the defaults for the provider screening. The second thing in the administration underneath the clinical tab here that should be set up prior to prescribing is your provider signature, and that is still underneath the maintenance here, provider signature. In here is where you want to upload the provider signature. So that way when the provider is printing out a medication or signing a progress note, writing an order, or even drafting or writing a clinical letter, their signature will be now placed onto that. And how you upload a signature is by selecting the new signature here on the top right. And it will open up to this new provider signature screen here. You can click on the CareTracker template, which will open up for the provider to sign their name. And you'll notice that there's a rectangular box here. We want you to sign inside of that rectangular box from one end to the other without touching the corners of the black line here. And we recommend using a extra fine point black Sharpie or a fine point black Sharpie. This makes it a lot cleaner of a look versus it breaking apart when it's uploaded into CareTracker like a ballpoint pen would. So that way when it's printed out on either a script, an order, progress note, or even a clinical letter, it's very clean looking versus blotchy like it would be with a ballpoint pen. So all the practice would need to do is print this out, have the provider sign, again, in the middle of this black rectangular here without touching the lines, and then upload that back into their computer. Make sure that they would save it as either a JPEG or a bitmap. It cannot be saved as a PDF to be uploaded back into the system. So it's either going to be a JPEG or a bitmap for it to work. Once that is completed, then it can now be uploaded into CareTracker. You'll see here underneath the select file, you would select the word browse and then locate where you had saved that bitmap or JPEG of the signature. And you just click on that to bring it into the system. From there, you would select the provider from the drop-down. These providers listed here are all the providers that are listed or active within inside of your company or your practice. You just select the provider's name. You'll see that the active button is automatically defaulted to yes. You would leave that as active. Next, you would create a 4-digit PIN, and then you would confirm that 4-digit PIN right here. And that PIN allows for the signature to be placed onto either a prescription, a order, progress note, or a clinical letter. As you can see here, it applies to all four of these right here. And once you are completed, you would just press save. That now would save the provider signature within inside of the system. So it would show you here in this list, if you had multiple providers that you were saving it for, who the provider was, when it was uploaded, if they were active, and what it applied to. If at any point you needed to edit, say the PIN number, you can click on this little piece of paper with the pencil, which would open back up that new provider signature screen, where you can go in now and edit the PIN if need be. And then you would just press save again. These two particular functions should be set up prior to any provider prescribing with inside of CareTracker, just to make sure that that interaction check-in is set up, and also that their signature's there in case they do have to print out a medication. So now that those two pieces are set up within the administration module, we want to now go and be able to prescribe for a patient. Now, there's a couple of things to keep in mind when you're prescribing a medication. If a patient is in the office and being seen for an appointment and they're listed on the schedule, their chart should always be accessed from Clinical Today by clicking on their name. If they have called in for a refill and they're not being seen within the practice, then you can type in their name on the top here. You can even use the magnifying glass and use these different ways to search for them, and then access their medical record from Hidden Medical to Medical Record. But again, if they are on the schedule and being seen, you always want to access their chart from their name on Clinical Today. And that is so that way it keeps the appointment attached to the encounter, which is attached to the billing. And you're not creating any type of duplicates. And when you open up the patient's chart, regardless if it's from Clinical Today, from their name, or from the medical record, it was always going to land on the chart summary, which is the landing page on the EMR side. And the chart summary is just a high-level overview of different things on a patient's chart. It could show open activities, problem list, allergies, documents, orders, results. And again, this screen can be customizable to what you want to see. The only thing that cannot be taken off is your open activities. That's the only thing that cannot be unchecked, I should say, when reviewing the chart summary. Now, there are 3 areas when prescribing a medication that should be reviewed prior to actually prescribing that medication. And that is the problems list, medications, and allergies. So we're going to actually begin in the problem list before we move on to medications and allergies, right here on the health history pane. So the problems list is your next choice down from chart summary. And this is where the historical list for the patient's diagnosis is housed. In this screen, you have a time frame of how you want to review or view these diagnoses. You have a way that you can view them too. You can choose to see them all if you want to see it in a problem list, if you want to see them if they're chronic or other diagnosis. You can see that the problem list itself has the diagnosis listed first, and then we have the SNOMED code, and then the ICD-10 code, the onset date, the last time it was diagnosed, a provider if that was entered in, the state of that diagnosis, and also the status. If there was any type of notes for that particular diagnosis, you'll see that this little printer right here would have been highlighted in blue. If I hover over it, it tells me that there's no notes, and it's also grayed out. And then we have a little arrow that gives us the log. CareTracker has a very good audit log process throughout the program. So you would be able to see when it was entered in, if it was changed or updated just by selecting that log. To the right-hand side here, we have the documents pane, as you can see here. Anything that is scanned in to CareTracker underneath documents and is assigned to the problem list would then be seen here on the right-hand side. Also underneath your problem list on the left-hand side, you have a plus sign next to the diagnosis code. And if you expand that plus sign, it shows you any time that particular diagnosis was linked to a particular order. It will provide the date that order was created using that diagnosis, the provider who created that order or ordered that order, the type, if it's a lab or an image, and then the description of that particular order as well. To add a diagnosis, you want to make sure that you click on the plus sign, Add Diagnosis, here on the top right. And this will allow you to add a diagnosis to the patient's chart. Now keep in mind, this is more of historical information for that patient. You'll see here in this diagnosis search, the patient's demographics are listed here on the top. And then below that, you have your diagnosis. This is a drop-down feature, and if you select that drop-down, you'll see a whole bunch of common diagnoses that my particular practice has saved as favorites. Now, keep in mind, this is a favorites list that's been created by my practice that I am using here. So every practice could have different diagnoses that they would consider to be favorite. The favorites are based off of the provider that is set in the user's batch underneath Clinical Today. And it's not based off of an individual user. It's based off of that provider that's been set into that batch. So if you are a practice that is just starting out on Care Tracker, you might not have a favorites list yet. You might be building that as you go along. So you might not have anything underneath this drop down. If that is the case, or if you don't find something that you were looking for, because it might not have been saved as a favorite, because it might be something that you don't regularly see, but it is you need to be documented as part of the patient's record, you can always search underneath this magnifying glass here. This is going to open up to the enhanced diagnosis search list, and this is powered by IMO. You'll see here that you have your diagnosis description, you have your SNOMED code, you have your ICD-10 code, and then you have the ability to either select it and then search again if need be, or you can now add it to your favorites list. You'll also see here that there are some codes that have an R next to them. And this is your HCC scoring. It's used for billing purposes for chronic care billing. Also, the words displayed here is not necessarily how it's going to be displayed on your billing. This would be how it's displayed within inside of your chart, but your more defined billing description might be a little bit different when it goes to the billing department. You also may find that sometimes there is a little S over here next to your ICD-10 code, and that's just indicating that it is a secondary code versus a primary code. So let me just type in a code here. So you see I just typed in hypertension, and I have all these different diagnoses that show up with my hypertension. Some of them have R's next to them for that, HCC scoring for chronic care billing. And then you'll see that some of these have a secondary or S next to it, which is a secondary code. And that's just an inclination that this should be used as a second code and not a primary code. Again, we don't tell you how to bill. We're just making the recommendation that it is a secondary code versus a primary code. If you find a code here and you want to make it part of your favorites list, you would just make sure to take this yellow star with the plus sign and click on it. It would add it to your favorites list. So I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to make that my favorite. So you see here now that that yellow star with the plus sign now changed to a gray star with a check mark. And it's now added that to my favorites list. So the next time that I come in and I need that particular diagnosis, I don't have to use our extended diagnosis search. I can just select from that drop down. If I need to manage my favorites, I can do so by selecting the star right here inside my diagnosis search. And I can also do it from clicking the star right next to my diagnosis as well. And that brings me in to my Manage Favorites screen here. And as you can see, I'm inside the diagnosis module, so it's got me automatically set to diagnosis, as you can see over here on the right-hand side of this screen. These are all my favorites that I can actually add to, I can rearrange, I can delete if I need be. You'll see here my diagnoses are listed here. They do not list in alphabetical order when adding to the list. They kind of format a list of when you've added them. If you want to put them like A to Z, you can select this sort A to Z button here, and it would put them into alphabetical order for you. If you need to get rid of a particular diagnosis, you can now find the diagnosis that you want to get rid of, and you just select the little X here, and that will delete it from that list. If you need to add to that, you can always click on that, and it brings it out to our enhanced diagnosis list here, and then I can add in whatever I need. So I'm going to add this hypertension associated with diabetes to my favorite list. If I want to add this to my diagnosis, I can click on that, and that will bring that in to my add diagnosis. I'm just going to hit add, and you can see it's already added there, and I can hit cancel. Let me just add that in again. If I need to add it in, to that screen here, I'm just going to click on it, and it's going to pull it into my diagnosis box here. You'll see that the original date automatically pulls in the date that I'm adding in that problem. If this is a record that maybe another provider in another practice had added, had diagnosed this patient with, you can always change this date to the date that that particular provider diagnosed them with that. Maybe you are a specialty and you're, doing a consult on that patient, and you're just having this as part of their historical record. Provider, if a provider within inside of the practice had diagnosed them with that and have now come to see you, you can select them from the drop down here. You can set an alert status. You can either set a soft alert, or you can do a pop-up alert. A soft alert would be this little triangle right here, where if you click on that, it shows you that alert. And that pop-up alert status is when you open up that patient's chart, and it pops up letting you know that there is some type of alert on that patient. You can put in any type of notes that you want as well here. You also have a sequence. When you select this sequence, it'll put it in the order on that list that you want to see this particular diagnosis. Is it the first one in the line of diagnosis behind here? Do you want to see it as number 1? Do you want to see it as number 2? Or is it number 3? So you have the ability to put the diagnosis in the sequence that you want to see. You can also select the status. Is it acute? Is it chronic? Is it erroneous? Maybe you enter this in by accident, so you want to say it's erroneous. Or is it resolved? You just want it to be on their medical record, but it is a resolved feature, a resolved diagnosis. The state, is it well controlled, controlled? Maybe it's poorly controlled. Whatever state that is in. And again, the resolved date was, if there was something that was resolved, you could put in that resolved date. Now you can either save or save as new. If you save as new, it's going to save this particular diagnosis in the list for the patient and then bring this screen back up so that way you can now enter in another diagnosis for them. I'm going to actually just press save. So that way it puts the diagnosis into the problem list for the patient. And you'll see here that I listed it as number 1 in my sequence. So it's listed number 1 right here, now that I saved it. I can also click on this blue button, or 2 blue arrows here, and I can change this order if I want to. I can do A to Z. I can move them up 1, how I see fit, and then save. And it will change the order of the sequence as well. If I ever need to change the status of a diagnosis because maybe it has resolved or maybe it was put in there incorrectly, to change that status, I will select the change status here on the top right. And that brings me into this change status screen here. I would just put in a check mark into the box of where I want to change that status, and I would change my drop down to either erroneous, or if it's resolved, maybe I want to add that it's a chronic condition. I can do that as well. But in this one, I'm going to say it's erroneous because I entered this in by accident. And then I would just press OK. And as you can see here, it's now no longer part of that patient's problem list. So that way, I've now updated that patient's problem list, and I can now move on to medications. Now, one thing to note, when you are finished reviewing the problem list, either reviewing it to make sure that it's still correct, adding in any diagnosis codes, or removing any diagnosis because they may be resolved, you want to make sure that you always are selecting this Mark Reviewed button. What this Mark Reviewed button will do, it will date stamp and timestamp along with stamping the person in the practice who reviewed its name. So if you are participating in any MIPS incentive programs, it's required documentation for that current list. So you want to make sure that you're always selecting that Mark Reviewed when you are finished with that particular list. So now that you reviewed the problem list, we want to move on to medications. Now, this is a historical medication list here. And as you can see, you still have the time frame of how you want to view it, just like you did in the problem list, in the same way that you want to, if you want to view it if active or they've been completed, or you want to see if they've been discontinued, you have that ability to do that as well. On the right-hand side here, you have your document pane. So again, if something is scanned into the documents for that patient and it's assigned to the medications in this case, it would show up over here on the right-hand side. You also have your medication list here. So you can see that you have the medication name, the original date that it was prescribed, when it was renewed, if it was renewed, an order number. Every time that a medication is prescribed outside or inside of Care Tracker, it is given an order number for tracking purposes with inside of the program, who the filling provider is, what that quality is, if there was any refills associated with that, what pharmacy it was sent to, either electronically or if it's printed out to be given to, if there was any diagnosis listed on that medication. And then you also have your actions over here. And in your actions, you're able to reorder medications. You can print them out. You can fax them. You can send them electronically. And you can also see the log. And the log, again, like I said, Care Tracker has a very good auditing system. It will tell you, who entered in the medication, who changed it, who prescribed it, if it was faxed, if it was sent electronically, if it was printed. You will also see on the far left-hand side sometimes medications might have a plus sign next to them. So as you can see here, I have a plus sign next to my albuterol. If I expand that out, it will show me every time that medication has been issued. So you can see underneath here, it was issued on 9/15, it was issued on 1/7. It's got different order numbers, the filling providers, the quantity, if it was saved, if it was administered, if it was sent electronically. There are a couple things on the top right of this screen that helps a user manage medications in the medication historical list. And we're going to start with the request med history, which is this one right here. This request med history is a hyperlink, and it will not be blue like this unless you have an encounter in context. So you have to have an encounter in context here. As you can see, because I clicked on that patient's name on Clinical Today because they were being seen and they're on the schedule, it brings that encounter into context for me here. As well as in the patient's demographics, there are certain things that need to be filled out as well too. So if I go back into the front screen for Clinical Today and I'm going to go into Edit, you want to make sure that the patient has an updated address so that their address is there. You also want to make sure that they have the correct date of birth. So their address here, date of birth. That they have a PCP listed. that the consent is changed to yes, and that they have an active insurance for that particular patient. If any of these things, including the encounter not being there, consent not changed to yes, they do not have an insurance on file, um, PCP is not listed, maybe a date of birth is not listed, maybe it's not an updated address are not listed, that particular link will not work for the patient. So this request med history link would not be in blue, it would be grayed out. This is based off of the pharmacy benefit plan for that particular patient. Now, I'm in a training environment, so you're not going to see any medications listed here, but for anybody else who's not in a training environment, they might see all medications that were prescribed for a patient that were paid for by that pharmacy benefit program. They were not paid by cash by the patient. They were paid by that pharmacy benefit program. And it's every instance. So if they had, 4 or 5 refills on that particular medication, you would see this medication listed 4 or 5 times. And what you can do is you can click on the medication that you want to be able to bring into the medication list with inside a care tracker. And once you click on that, you would just select add the medication to medication list. Or maybe you just want to update the last renewal dates only. You have those 2 particular options here. As you can see, I have an error saying that my patient's not eligible, and it's because I'm in a training environment. But if you did not have those particular things listed in the demographics for the patient, such as their address, correct date of birth, PCP listed, consent sent to yes, and active insurance, you possibly could get that error as well too. You can press on that as many times as need be. As long as those particular things are listed. And again, you do need to have an encounter in context. So you can see here, this is my encounter that's in context because I clicked on that patient's name from Clinical Today and kept the appointment attached to the particular encounter, which now allows me to use that particular feature. If a practice needs to manually enter in a medication. So this is one way that you can pull in that medication from the pharmacy benefit plan. But if a practice needs to enter in a medication, you can do so by selecting the plus sign with patient med here on the top right. And this is going to bring you into the patient medication. You can now select a provider. If there's a provider within your practice maybe that prescribed it, you can select the provider from the drop down here. Again, you can select from the medication favorites here from the provider that's in your batch. If you need to look up the medication, you can click on the little magnifying glass here. And it'll give you search for. You can search for medications. That will not change. You can either look for dispensable or routed. Now, dispensable is medication that's prescribed and given, and routed is an injectable. So that's the difference between the drug types. And then you have your search terms, contains or begins with. So I'm going to type in Pepsid for this patient here. So you can see here, when I type in the word Pepsid, it's going to give me all of the non-generic type Pepsids. If I want to see generics as well, maybe I want to prescribe a generic versus the other type, I can, but if I include generics and hit search again, it's going to give me all the generics as well for that Pepsid. So you'll see here that my generics are now highlighted in italics. So these are the generics for Pepsid. Otherwise, if you don't have this include generics here, it will actually bring back the name brand for that particular medication. You'll also notice on the far right-hand side, I have a star with that plus sign. And you might see this throughout different modules within inside a care tracker. I can save this particular one if I wanted to my favorites as well too, because this might be a particular medication that we prescribe on a regular basis, and instead of having to look for it each time, I can just select from it from the drop down. So I'm going to put this on my favorite list here, And you'll notice when I do that, it changes that yellow star from a yellow star with a plus sign to a gray star with a check mark. So now that has been added to my favorites list. So now I can click on the medication, and that will bring that into the medication for me here. And what just populated here was that interaction screening that I had set up prior to even looking at my problems or medications or allergies. So that is the interaction screen that would populate for you. Now you have your SIG here. And if I needed to, I could select from the drop down here. Now keep in mind, what I'm doing here is not prescribing a medication. This is a historical medication for that patient. So I'm adding in the medication that might have been prescribed from either their PCP, if I am a specialist and they're being referred to me, or maybe they were referred out to a specialist and the specialist prescribed something for them and I want to add that to their medical record. So as their primary care, I'm kind of like the project manager of their health. So I want to add that to their medical record. From this point on, you can fill out as much as you want for that medication. The one thing that we would recommend is you fill out as much as possible in case you are taking over that medication. You would be able to prescribe it or reorder it for them. So you can enter in a dose for them. So I'm going to put 1 tablet once a day. We'll do 90 days here. You'll notice as I did that dose here, my 1 tablet once a day, it now populated in my directions here. Now sometimes practices might not like this for 90 days, so they will take that out and they just want 1 tablet a day. If this is something that's the way that you prescribe it normally, you can always make this a favorite as well too, just by clicking on your little star with the plus sign. And again, that changes it now to grayed out with a check mark. We also have the dosing calculator here as well. So if you click on that, it will bring up, based on the patient's last weight, dosing type, the route for you. So you can use that as well. You have your RX start date, the date that they started that medication. You'll see that it defaults to today. If this was something that like a sample was provided, you could always say yes, samples were provided for tracking purposes in case anything ever happens with those particular samples. Is this active? Is it completed medication? Sometimes medications might require a diagnosis to be tied to that. So you can select from the drop down. These are the diagnoses listed on that particular patient's record. Their dispense. If there's allowed to substitute, any type of notes. You can also put in, a medication original date. Maybe the original date was prior to you entering in your system because, again, they went to the specialist who prescribed that for them. So you could change that date if need be. And then if you need to set an alert. Now, again, all these other additional things here, because this is a historical med, is based on the scope of the practice. It doesn't necessarily need to be filled out. It's based on the scope of the practice. We do recommend to fill out as much as you can in case you are taking over that medication for that particular patient. But again, it's based on the scope of the practice. So from this point, I can either save or I can save in new. If I save in new, this allows me now to add in another medication. It will save this particular medication for me and add in another medication. Or I can just save it and it will put it onto the medication list for me. And then if I hit save anew, it was just going to save that one for me and bring this up, and I would redo that whole process again. Now you'll see that my Pepsid is listed here first, and you can see that it was manually entered. So on this screen here, you'll see if a status of a medication was manually entered, if it was printed, if it was administered, or if it was electronically sent. Now, when you're documenting an injection, that's what this medication administered here is a documentation of an injection. And how you document an injection is underneath your med administration here on the top. you click on this here, anything that's in red is required for you to fill out. So your ordering provider, your admin provider, the lot number, the medication, manufacturer, the expiration date, the dose route, the amount and site. These are all required, and then you would save. So any injection that was done in the office would be entered in underneath this med administration link. And again, anything that is in red would need to be filled out. Your RX start date here is the date that it was started. Your end date is a date that it would be completed and taken off from the medication list. So depending on what type of injection you are giving a patient, maybe it's a B12 injection. So they come in every so many weeks for that injection. So you might have a start date but not an end date because it's a continuous flow. Your admin date would be the only thing that changes for that particular type of injection. Or if it's just, an injection such as, such as a, I don't know, like a temporary steroid injection. Maybe it's a one-time thing just to get them, on the course of the antibiotics that they need to take, so that way it's faster into the system. They might have a start date here and an end date here, so that way it comes off of their medication list as of that end date. So there's a couple of ways that you can reorder medications with inside a Care Tracker. And one way is by selecting this little arrow here and selecting the word reorder. And this is why we recommend, if you're taking over a medication that somebody else, like a specialist, has, put a patient on, you might be taking over the maintenance of that now. We recommend putting in as much information as you can. So that way you're able to reorder that medication. As you can see here, you have the patient's pharmacy. So anything that's linked to the patient in their demographics would be listed on the top here. And then you have the favorites for the practice as well below that. Gives you the pharmacy's address, their eligibility. The filling provider, again, is based off of that batch, who's listed in your batch, my encounter date. And then here's that medication that I want to reorder. I would be able to change this if I needed to. And then I'll be able to either send it, I could print it, I could fax it out, I could send it in to do, I could record it for somebody else if I'm prescribing on behalf of my provider, so that way he can review it or she can review it prior to sending electronically. My diagnosis I can select again from that drop down if need be. I can allow substitutes, any notes to the pharmacy, and again you can create notes to the pharmacy favorites. So if I have any of that, I can select them there. My medication date. Is there any samples that were given in the office? I can add my RX, and then based off of how I selected underneath my action would depend on how this would go. If I sent it to send, it would send electronically. And I would just hit complete. That is one way that medications can be reordered. You do have the ability to reorder multiple medications at once. Instead of coming in here one by one and going to the action item here, you can select the reorders here on the top right. When I select this reorders medication here, I can select the patient's pharmacy from here, from the drop down. If I need to change that pharmacy, I can look up a pharmacy if I needed to. I would just put in a check mark into the medications that I want to order, and I select order medication. Now I can also, before I select the order medication, I can edit. So this allows me to edit the SIG if I need to change the SIG, if I need to add refills to it. Maybe I'm covering for that provider that's originally, prescribed it in my practice, so I want to make sure my name's there versus the other provider because I'm the one sending the order. And I can now select if I want to record, print, send it electronically, or fax it. And when I'm through, I just hit my little check mark here, and that would close that out. Now I can order all my medications. I can also change my status of medications if need be. A little bit different than in the problem list. You'll see here my change status is listed right here. So now I can put a check mark in the medications that I want to change that status, and I can select from the drop down here. Maybe I want to say this is completed. They no longer need it. So once I hit completed, it now takes that medication off of my list here. And again, once you're finished updating the medication list or verifying that this is all their medications, you want to make sure that you're always selecting this mark reviewed. And again, that's going to date stamp, time stamp, and it's also going to put the person who reviewed that list's name there as well too, as you can see right here. And again, that is used for MIPS purposes. So if you are participating in the MIPS program, make sure that you're getting in the habit of marking reviewed any place that you see that button. It would help you with a lot of different objectives within inside the MIPS program. Now, one other thing I want to show you is that you have a print option too within your medications. And that's right here on the top right. So if you select this little arrow next to it, you can print out a summary report of the medications. You can print out a detailed report, and you can also print out a patient report as well too, which is a little bit different than the print options within the problem list, where you're only printing out the active problems list. Now, before we go and prescribe, there's one other field that you want to check, one other pane, I should say, that you want to check, and that's the allergies. You always want to check the allergy section because you want to see if the patient's allergic to anything. They could be allergic to something that's in a medication where they can't have that particular type of medication anymore. So as you can see here, you still have that time frame. You can view all last encounter, past 6 months, past year. For allergies, you have your document section over here on the right-hand side. So again, if something is scanned in underneath documents for that patient and it's assigned to the allergy section, it will appear here for you to be able to view. So to add an allergy for a patient, you're going to select the Add Allergy button right here. And that's going to open up to our patient allergy feature. So if I have any allergies that are favorites, and I always recommend if there are certain allergies that you see patients always coming in for as common allergies in your practice, make sure to add them as your favorite. So that way you're selecting from the drop down versus having to search for them each and every time. So you can see here, there's a list of my favorites. But if you need to search for an allergy, you can always select the magnifying glass here. And again, it gives you the search for drug class, medication allergy, non-medication allergy, or immunization allergy. As you can see, you can also search for begins with, contains, and then this is your search text box here. So I'm going to put in the word pollen. And if I hit search, these are the different things that populate underneath my pollen. And you can see pollen extracts is categorized as medication. But like pollen in trees, grasses, weeds, ragweed, that's all non-medication. If it's something that you're looking for and it's not in the list, you could always select not in the list. And what that does is it puts notes here of what that medication, well, what that allergy is for you. But it's going to also show that it's a non-coded allergy as well too. So you want to make sure that you select what the reaction is to that. Your report start date, when did this start happening to the patient? The report end date, if you were to inactivate that, that's when you put in that end date. And then maybe I want to put this as a status only because it's not codified, it's not within the system. So maybe I want to pop up. So that way I know, you know, this patient is allergic to this, and I can save. So you can see, because I said not in the system, it's now an uncoded, non-screenable allergen. So you can still document stuff that's not, that you don't find in the system. It's just going to be uncoded. And you'll also notice that this little like printer is highlighted in blue, and that's just showing me what that is listed here. I can also see the interactions if there was any, and I can also see a log. So I can see who entered it, when it was entered, when it was changed, and so forth. If I need to inactivate the allergy, because allergies do change over time, I can put in an end date here, and I can save. You'll notice that it's no longer on my list here. If I show the inactive right here, it will populate all the inactives that are on this patient's list. The print feature here, if I select this little mark here, is I can only print out the allergies for that patient, the active allergies for that patient. And again, once I'm completed reviewing, either adding, taking away, maybe I have not changed anything. Maybe I'm just reviewing it to make sure that, in fact, they are still have these allergens. I want to make sure that I hit the word mark reviewed. And again, it's going to date stamp, time stamp, and also put the person's name who reviewed that particular module. So now that you've reviewed the problem list, the medications, and the allergies, you now want to prescribe the medication for the patient. In doing so, I'm going to select the RX button on the top here underneath the clinical tools. Now remember, anything being done to the patient would be done from the toolbar up here. Anything that has been done for the patient in the historical would be in your historical module here that we just reviewed. So I'm going to select RX, and that's going to open up to our prescription writer. This is where you would prescribe that medication. Now it looks kind of similar to the medication module that we reviewed, but again, that was just historical information. We were just putting that in there to put it part of the patient's medical record because they were either prescribed by a specialist or by somebody within the practice and you've taken over for them the medication. So now here at the top of the screen, you're going to see the patient's demographics, all their information here. You'll see the last time they had an appointment, when they have a next appointment, if it's been booked, vitals, medications, allergies, diagnosis, and you can hover over all these. You'll also see the pharmacy. Now, I did not select the pharmacy. It automatically defaulted there. And the reason being is that in the patient's demographics, I have a default preferred, I should say, retail pharmacy. So let me close out of this here, and I'm going to go back to my Clinical Today screen. And underneath my Edit button here, I'm going to pull up the patient's demographics. So it automatically defaults to patient details. I'm going to go to the Relationships tab here. And this is something that the front desk can do when they're checking in the patient. They can find out what the preferred pharmacy is. Sometimes patients might have multiple pharmacies. They could have a pharmacy that is close to their job. They could have a pharmacy close to their home. They could have a pharmacy depending on if they have medications that are required to be mail ordered. So they can have a mail order pharmacy as well too. As you can see here, I have 6 different pharmacies listed for this particular patient. So what the front desk would want to do is select Add a Relationship, and they're going to select Pharmacy. Now in this screen here, there could be a whole bunch of pharmacies that have been saved as the practice pharmacies, favorites. So they could select from this drop-down if it's one of the ones that has been saved, because you might have patients that go to this particular pharmacy because it's near your practice. Or it's a local, as you can see here, like CVS, depending on where your practice is located. If not, you can select this magnifying glass here, and you would be able to put in the name of the pharmacy here, and we recommend also city and state. And then you would hit search, and it will pull up any of the pharmacies that you need. So I'm going to do So I just put in CVS, Providence, Rhode Island, and here's all of the different pharmacies that are located in Providence. So then you can verify with the patient, the address of that particular pharmacy. And you'll notice that the pharmacies either have an ERX next to it or a C, and that just means that they receive it electronically, non-controlled substances, and C is for controlled. So if you are enlisted with our EPCS, as we call it, and you send out controlled substances, then you want to make sure that the pharmacy that you select receives controlled substances electronically. So you have the ERX and you have the C. You'll notice that this one here does not have an ERX or a C, so that means that they only receive or only accept a printed copy of that medication. And then to select that pharmacy, you would just put in a radio dial here, and it brings in the pharmacy for you here. And then is it a preferred retail? Is this where they prefer to go? Or is this a preferred mail order? This is where they have to send their scripts for diabetes medication because it has to be sent through the mail. You would just select yes or no, and you make sure that it's active. So that way, when the provider is now pulling up the right script screen, it's automatically there for them. They don't have to spend the time looking for that pharmacy. So let's go back into Tina Medicine, and I'm going to go into my RX here. So you can see here that that pharmacy is my preferred retail. And again, if I select from that drop down, here's the other 5 other ones that are selected there as well too. So maybe she's not going to this one because she's going to work in this pharmacy. CVS is closer to her work, and that's where she wants to pick it up today because she stopped in for this appointment on her way to work. So I can always change the pharmacy there. You'll see your filling provider automatically defaulted for you based on the provider that is set in the batch for the clinical side underneath clinical today. It also provides the provider's address as well. If there was a supervising provider linked to that, that would be here, already defaulted. And then my encounter date. Again, my encounter date matches the encounter date that's on the encounter. And then I have my medication here. So based off of my filling provider who's in my batch, I can now select what I need to prescribe. If this is a favorite based off that provider, maybe it's something that we prescribe all the time. Or if I need to search for that particular medication, I can. I can also include generics if I need to. So you'll see that my generics are in italics. If I needed to save it as a favorite, I could just make sure that this was grayed out in a check mark. So these are all my favorites. I can click on that medication and that pulls that in. And here's my interaction screening. And based off of what I set in that interaction screening, you'll notice that this is highlighted in green. So it's going to be that, drug to food interaction. I can now select the override to that. Maybe this, outweighs, the benefit outweighs the risk. If I need to put any type of notes in there, I can. And then I just hit accept. Now, if I had a favorite SIG here, I could select it, but I do not for this one. So I'm going to enter in my amount. We'll do 90 days. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to save this as my favorite SIG so that way next time it will be in my SIG list. They're going to start this today. I can't send because I am not an actual provider. I'm in a training system, so that's why mine is defaulted to print. But everybody else who is signed up would have this as send. So that way they would be able to send it to this pharmacy here. You'll also notice up here on the top right, this RX benefits. We partnered with a company called Cover My Meds. And this kind of gives you an estimation of what this particular medication will cost, the plan cost, and the coverage details as well too, based off of that pharmacy benefit plan for this particular patient. And it gives you that information here. Med formulary, I can, click for more information if I needed to. I can now add a diagnosis because, again, sometimes certain medications require a diagnosis. Sometimes they don't. But I'm going to put in that diagnosis here. My dispense, 90 tablets. Do I allow a substitution? Yes. Any notes to the pharmacy? Maybe I want the patient to call us for a follow-up appointment after this 90 days. I'm not going to prescribe them again until that. And then my medication original date is today's date. Did I provide them a sample? I'm going to say no. And I'm going to add this RX to my prescription summary here. So as you can see, I have my medication below here. This gives me the medication name, the date, the quantity, the unit, if I put any refills, the amount of days, my diagnosis code here. If there's any notes to the pharmacy, you'll see that this little printer here is highlighted in blue. And if I hover over that, it just tells me what I had put as notes to that pharmacy. This action will mirror the action that I've selected up here. If it's to send, it'll send electronically. I've selected print, so it's going to print out. If I am going to send it via fax, if I have signed up for our fax service, I can send it via fax. I could even send it as a to-do. I could record it because maybe I'm writing it out on behalf of my provider and I want my provider to be able to look at it and send it electronically after they've given their approval. Or I can record and mark print it because maybe it's just something I want to have in the file for the patient. You'll notice here my pre-authorization is green. If there was a pre-authorization that was required on that particular medication, this would be in red, just giving you a heads up that a pre-authorization is required. I can also print out medication education for that particular patient if I needed to. I can also edit the RX, so it would take it out of this prescription summary pane here so I can make any changes that I needed to. And if I wanted to not send it or print it, I can hit the little X here and it will remove it from this depository right here. So once I hit the word complete, depending on what action I selected, it might be sent electronically. In my case, I said print, and that's where that signature with the PIN number is going to come in. So you can see here, it's looking for my PIN. So I'm going to put in my PIN that has been set up for my provider. And here is my prescription that I can print out now. Again, it's got the information of the practice and the provider prescribing, the patient's demographics, what that RX is. You'll see what it's telling you based on the SIG, and here is that provider's signature right here for you. So now I can print this out and give it to the patient just by selecting this, and it will print it out, give it to the patient. And then once I close this, it's going to close out, and it's going to now become part of the patient's medical record. So as you can see here, this is the medication that I just prescribed. It's letting me know that it's been, this is the pharmacy that I want her to go to, and it's printed. I also have that diagnosis code here because I added it to the prescription. So that allows me to now see that diagnosis code here. So that is prescribing a medication with inside of Care Tracker. Now there's a couple of things that practices will want to do on a daily basis, and that's off of the Clinical Today screen. Over here on your quick tasks, there are a couple of tasks that deal with RXs. You have your RX new. So if I click on this, it'll take a minute because I have 17 listed in there for this provider here to open up. Anytime a prescription is recorded and not sent, or maybe not printed, it's going to show up underneath your RX new. And this is so that way you can use it as a way so that way the provider can review it before they send it electronically, or if they reject it, maybe they don't want to see it. So you can see based off of my batch, I now see Brett McFadden, who is in my batch. So again, my batch is here. And it's who my provider is that I selected here from this drop down. If I'm covering for somebody else and maybe I'm working with another provider, I can always select them from this drop down here as well. But you want to make sure that you're always reviewing your RX news daily, if not a couple of times a day, depending on how busy your office is. So here's my patient, the provider, this is the medication, this is the SIG, the quantity, the original date, it was saved. So now here I can reject it, I can print it, I can send it electronically if I need to. I can fax it if I need to, and I can also see the log. So this is where they would be able to send that electronically if they needed to. Also on your Clinical Today, things that should be reviewed is your RX renewals. Renewals come in from the pharmacies. So um, you could get, several renewals a day. And again, this is going to default to my provider that I have set in my batch, but I can look for other providers as well, and I can select the word all. So it shows me all providers if I needed to. I can also see if it's a pharmacy or a patient, because if you allow patients to send in requests from their patient portal, you would see patient requests as well. If they're active, if there's any errors, you'll see something listed underneath the errors here. Your dates, you can have a custom date range as well. And I'm going to go back in time a little for this because, again, we're in a training environment. So we might not have any. We might have already used them all. But let's see if I can find one here. So you'll see this is a patient request. So my patient, Bob Health Tracker. This is the drug, the provider, phone, fax, the pharmacy, active dates, and notes. I can click on this here. It's going to bring Bob Health Tracker into context for me. And then this is the patient request. So this is the requested prescription here. This is the pharmacy information, the provider, again, the patient. I can do a new ERX. I can deny this one, and then I would have to put a reason why I denied it. I can print this out if I needed to. Now, this is the same as if it came in from a pharmacy as well. You would see the same thing, requested prescription information and all the information for the refill as well. So then you would either accept it, or you can do deny because maybe you're sending a new prescription, or you can do a new ERX as well too. So again, the new ERXs should be reviewed daily, if not a couple times a day, depending on how many come in. And then your last one here that should be reviewed underneath your clinical today is your RX change requests. And RX change requests come in from the pharmacy. And they could be for different things. It could be because they need a substitution for a generic. It could be because there's a therapeutic interchange, or maybe there's a prior authorization needed, so they want to be able to prescribe another medication because there's a prior auth that needs to be done on that particular medication. Just some of the reasons that it could be. Let's see if I have any here to kind of show you what it looks like. I'm going to go back in time and see if I can pull up any. And again, my provider is defaulted as the provider that's in my batch. So I could also do like patient and context if that was the patient I was looking for as well too. It doesn't seem to be that we have any. But you would be able now to address that, and you'd be able to deny that or, accept that change and let them be able to prescribe the particular generic that they need for that particular thing. So again, these are underneath your clinical today quick tasks, and these quick tasks here again are based off of that provider that's set up in your batch here. And on the EMR side, just as a refresher, the provider only needs to be selected once. It's not like on the PM side where you're doing a batch every day. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to your support entity for further assistance. Thank you.